Mr. Cooke, thank you for taking the time to be with us today to discuss the budget.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by talking about the size of this year's budget. The number is actually smaller than last year, but I've heard you say that the budget is growing. Can you explain to us how that is?
Sure, this is one of the confusing parts of the budget. The current year budget, just to give the audience some numbers, is about $950 million. Next year's recommended budget will be $941.5 million. So it'll actually be smaller than the current year budget. Having said that, though, revenues are growing, and so the reason the budget is going down is one simple reason. We are removing the mental health local management entity out of next year's budget. Because of that merger with Durham and the creation of Alliance Behavioral Healthcare, we're going to take $32 million out of the budget, and those revenues and expenditures now go over to the new entity. So once you take that out of the budget's going to grow by about $22 million, and we're going to have new revenues next year, which is a good news piece. It's the first time in 4 years that revenues are growing by that amount, and the majority is property tax revenue. The tax base is growing, and sales tax will be growing next year as well.
Speaking of things that are growing in the budget, this is the first year in the recent past that we've talked about an increase in spending for education. Can you tell us about that increase and how it came about?
Sure. Since the tax base is growing, it's going to grow at 1.25%. Now that doesn't sound that exciting, but that's still the largest growth rate in the last 4 years. And our approach this year on the budget is to share that increase in the tax base with the school system and with Wake Tech. So we're going to grow those appropriations, the appropriation that goes to the school system, by 1.25%. And we're going to grow the appropriation to Wake Tech by 1.25%. So it's the first time their appropriations have increased in the last 3 or 4 years. Now, we've had a priority of education, and even though they were flat while everything else was being reduced in the county budget generally, we did that so we can keep education flat. This year we're able to give education a little bump in the appropriation.
Talking about the capital plan now and still staying on education, there's a bond referendum possibly coming up in the fall that came up during the budget. Would you like to share about that?
Sure. Each year this time of the budget we talk about next year's capital program and where we stand financially with our debt, what we call our debt and capital program. As we retire debt each year, because we've been building schools and building Wake Tech facilities, as that debt's retired, we also gain debt capacity for new projects. And there's an amount of capacity that we have that we could allocate to any need without raising the property tax rate. And so Wake Tech has a plan on the table. They've been working on that for quite a while. And so the recommendation is to look at a referendum for Wake Tech, which would be $200 million in the fall.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, again, I think this is, as I mentioned in the presentation, things are better. You know, it's all relative, though. Things are better than they have been over the last 3 years. But it's still not like it was back in the early part of the decade and before that. And we've changed how we've had to approach things in the county, and we've focused on our priorities and core services, and I think we've managed well through that process, and it's a good news piece to know that revenues are growing just a little bit.
It is good news. Thank you, David. If you'd like to comment on the 2013 recommended budget for Wake County, there will be 2 public hearings. They're both going to be on the first Monday in June. The first one is at 2 p.m. in the Wake County Courthouse in room 700 during the Board of Commissioners' regularly scheduled meeting. The second public hearing is at 7 p.m. the same day at the Wake County Commons Building on Carrier Drive. Now here's Chris Smith with more on the budget in this edition of Quick Clicks.